A recent survey suggests that about 72% of adults in the United States, over 184 million people, now feel at least somewhat prepared for an emergency. In other words, millions are following the same survival channels, reading the same blogs, and buying the same must-have food lists. The problem is what happens when a real crisis hits. Those same millions are likely to rush stores at once, competing for identical supplies. Rice would be gone in hours, canned soup by midday, and pasta shelves would empty almost immediately. I saw this firsthand in March 2020 at my local Costco, where entire dry goods sections were wiped out before lunch. People were even arguing over basics like beans. Meanwhile, some foods I'll mention later stayed fully stocked for days, completely ignored while everything else disappeared. That reveals a key flaw in most preparedness thinking. It's not just about storing food, but about avoiding what everyone else is storing. The system creates a feedback loop where the same items get targeted, making shortages worse. The 13 foods I'll cover next break that pattern. They're inexpensive, nutrient-dense, long-lasting, sometimes for years or decades, and usually overlooked simply because most people don't think to buy them. At the same time, pressure is building. Tariffs expected to impact grocery prices between April and October 2026. Ongoing supply chain disruptions and rising fuel and fertilizer costs are already pushing prices up. Food inflation rose 2.4% in February alone, and some analysts expect it to continue. So the question is simple. Will you keep stockpiling what everyone else is fighting over, or start building a supply that avoids the crowd entirely? Number 1 is shelf-stable lard. Now, I realize this one might put some people off, but I'm not really here to soften it because this is easily one of the most ignored survival foods out there. I'm not referring to the refrigerated kind you find in the dairy section. I'm talking about rendered lard that's been processed for shelf stability, the kind sold in boxed form that sits right on the baking aisle at room temperature. Before anyone jumps straight to concerns about cholesterol, it's worth putting things in perspective. In an actual survival scenario, the primary threat isn't long-term heart health. It's not getting enough calories to function. And this is where lard stands out, because it delivers more calories per ounce than most practical foods you can realistically store. Just 1 tablespoon contains about 115 calories of pure energy, which is compact, efficient fuel your body can actually use. What really drives the point home is historical context. I was reading through original pioneer journals last year, handwritten accounts from people traveling the Oregon Trail. One thing shows up repeatedly. They depended heavily on lard. It helped them survive harsh winters, supplied essential dietary fat, and remarkably, it stayed usable for the entire journey without refrigeration. These weren't online survival enthusiasts. They were people enduring real conditions. I also decided to test this myself because I don't like repeating claims I haven't personally verified. I picked up a box of shelf-stable lard about 3 years ago and stored it in my garage, where temperatures swing from around 95 degrees in summer down to 20 degrees in winter. When I finally opened it last month, it was still in perfect condition. No bad odor, no strange discoloration, nothing off about it at all. What makes this even more useful in preparedness terms is its versatility. You can obviously cook with it, but it also works for making soap, serves as a base for certain medicinal salves, and in an emergency, it can even be used as a lamp fuel. On top of that, the cost is almost surprising. I bought a 3-pound box recently for about $4.50, which works out to over 5,000 calories for just a few dollars. To put that in context, it's hard to find any freeze-dried survival meal that comes close to that kind of calorie value per dollar. And perhaps most importantly, during shortages, lard isn't something people rush to grab. Even in 2020, when cooking oils disappeared from shelves, lard was still sitting there largely untouched. And that's really the key idea here. Number 2 is canned fish roe, fish eggs. This one probably sounds unusual at first, but if you look at it through a nutrition lens, it actually holds up surprisingly well. I came across canned fish roe completely by accident about 2 years ago while shopping in a European grocery store. When I got back and started researching what I had just bought, I honestly didn't expect much, but what I found changed my perspective. Fish roe is extremely nutrient-dense, almost to an extreme degree. It contains high levels of omega-3 fatty acids, along with significant amounts of vitamin B12 vitamin D, selenium, and a strong dose of protein packed into very small servings. Because the cans are compact, they take up almost no storage space, yet the nutritional output per bite is far higher than what most people rely on in typical prepper food stockpiles. What really matters in a long-term emergency is how quickly diets can become unbalanced. Most basic staples like rice contain almost no fat, and beans only offer a limited amount. Over time, that kind of diet can lead to deficiencies that affect brain function, mood stability, and even decision-making. And in a high-stress situation, impaired judgment is a serious liability. Fish roe essentially fills that gap by providing concentrated fats and micronutrients that support cognitive function. To test this in a practical way, I ran a simple experiment on myself last winter. For about 5 days, I stuck to a standard prepper-style diet: rice, beans, and canned vegetables. By around day 4, I noticed I felt drained, irritable, and mentally foggy. Then, over the following stretch, I introduced a small can of fish roe every other day. The change was noticeable. My energy levels improved, my mood stabilized, and my focus came back much more clearly than before. The interesting part is that most people in the US have never even tried fish roe, which means it tends to be completely overlooked during shortages. Because of that, it's the kind of item that can sit untouched while other shelves get emptied. I personally keep around 50 small cans stored away. The total cost was roughly $60, which works out to dozens of high-density nutrition servings that can last for years, and very few people are even thinking about stocking it. Number 3 is dried whole corn kernels. This is one of those foods that older generations understood well, but somehow it has largely disappeared from modern preparedness conversations. I'm talking about plain dried field corn kernels. Not popcorn, not cornmeal, but the full whole kernels used for storage and processing. You can still find them in feed stores and occasionally in grocery bulk sections, and the cost is often surprisingly low. When stored correctly in airtight containers with oxygen absorbers, dried whole corn can remain usable for a decade or more without a meaningful loss in nutritional quality. It's also far more versatile than most people assume. You can grind it into cornmeal for baking cornbread, process it with an alkaline solution like lime water to make hominy, a staple that supported entire civilizations for centuries, or even sprout it to produce fresh greens during winter months when nothing else is available. I came across historical accounts of the Dust Bowl era that really highlight its value. Researchers documented families who survived for extended periods primarily on stored corn. Many would purchase 50-pound sacks for very little money and stretch them across months of meals, relying on its calorie density and versatility to get through extremely difficult conditions. To test practicality, I bought 50 pounds of dried corn myself last summer for about $18. That's an enormous amount of calories for a very small investment, and it can be turned into multiple different food forms depending on need. One of the biggest advantages that most people overlook is that corn can also be turned into tortillas through a process called nixtamalization. By soaking the kernels in a lime water solution overnight and then grinding them, you can produce fresh masa for tortillas. In a long-term scenario where wheat-based products are unavailable, having an alternative way to produce bread-like staples becomes a major advantage. And interestingly, during recent periods of supply strain when items like rice and beans were quickly cleared from shelves, dried corn remained largely ignored in many places, including feed stores where entire pallets went untouched. Number 4 is black garlic. This one is a bit more unusual, and yes, it does cost more than some of the other items on the list, but it earns its place because of what it offers. Black garlic is essentially regular garlic that has been slowly aged through a controlled fermentation process. Over time, the cloves turn dark, almost jet black, and develop a sweet, rich, complex flavor. The important point here is that it becomes shelf-stable without needing refrigeration. Nutritionally, black garlic is notable because it contains significantly higher antioxidant levels than raw garlic, in some cases roughly double. Research has linked it to immune-supporting properties, which, in a prolonged crisis scenario, becomes less of a bonus and more of a practical necessity. Unlike fresh garlic, which tends to spoil within a couple of weeks, black garlic can last for several months at room temperature. If it's stored properly in a sealed container, it can even hold up to around a year. That kind of stability makes it useful in situations where refrigeration isn't guaranteed. To put it in perspective, imagine an extended emergency where stress is high, sleep is inconsistent, and food variety is limited. Under those conditions, your immune system can take a real hit. Black garlic, in that sense, functions almost like a food-based form of support that helps fill that gap. It also stands out because of its taste. Instead of the sharp bite of raw garlic, it has a mellow sweetness, often compared to balsamic vinegar with a subtle garlic undertone. You can eat it directly if you want. I do that fairly often. Or you can add it to rice, soups, stews, or any basic meal to make it more flavorful and satisfying. You can buy it online in bulk, and prices I've seen come out to around $40 for a pound. That's definitely more expensive than staples like corn or beans, but you're paying for a concentrated, shelf-stable ingredient with functional benefits that lasts a long time. And because most people don't even know it exists, black garlic tends to remain available even during shortages, when more familiar items disappear quickly from shelves. Number 5 is hardtack. This one is definitely old school, and on the surface it doesn't sound very appealing, but once you understand its purpose, it starts to make a lot more sense. Hardtack is a dense, extremely dry cracker that was widely used by sailors, soldiers, and explorers long before modern kitchens, refrigeration, or even basic utensils were common. What made it so valuable and why it still gets talked about today is its incredible shelf life. Hardtack is essentially just flour and water baked until all moisture is removed. Because of that, it resists spoilage in a way that most foods simply can't match. When stored properly, it can last for years, and some historical accounts suggest it may remain edible for decades under ideal conditions. Its durability is so extreme that pinpointing an exact expiration date has always been difficult. To be clear, this is not comfort food. It's hard, dry, and very plain. Eating it is less like enjoying a snack and more like slowly working through a dense, flour-based brick. But in a situation where fresh food is gone and options are limited, its practicality becomes obvious. It exists purely to deliver calories and survive harsh conditions when nothing else is available. Historically, hardtack earned a reputation for being nearly indestructible in the context of food storage. It was the kind of staple that could survive long voyages and difficult campaigns, essentially acting as a last resort ration that was still usable when everything else had deteriorated. The interesting part is that you can still make it yourself very cheaply. It only requires flour, water, and optionally a bit of salt. The process is straightforward. Mix the ingredients into a dough, roll it out thin, and bake it at a low temperature for long enough to remove nearly all moisture. Once it's fully dried, you store it in an airtight container, and it can sit for years without issue. It's not glamorous, but that's exactly the point. Hardtack is designed to simply last until nothing else is left. Number 6 is canned coconut milk. This is one that rarely shows up on mainstream preparedness lists, which is surprising once you actually look at its nutritional value and storage potential. Canned coconut milk is rich in fats, especially medium-chain triglycerides, MCTs, which the body can convert into energy quite efficiently. In practical terms, one can typically provide around 400 to 500 calories, and those calories are dense and sustaining rather than quick-burning sugar spikes. In terms of storage, canned coconut milk generally has a shelf life of about 3 to 5 years, and in many cases it can last even longer if it's kept in a cool, stable environment away from heat and sunlight. That makes it a reliable pantry item for long-term planning. Its usefulness also comes from how flexible it is in everyday use. You can use it as a base for curries, soups, and stews, mix it into rice to boost both calories and flavor, or even drink it directly if you need a quick source of energy. Unlike powdered milk, it doesn't require any preparation, no mixing, no measuring, and no additional water. You simply open the can and use it immediately. One detail that makes it particularly interesting is that coconut milk contains lauric acid, a naturally occurring compound that has been studied for its antimicrobial properties. In situations where food variety is limited and sanitation conditions may not be ideal, having foods that also offer some immune-supportive qualities becomes more relevant than people often realize. What stands out most, though, is how consistently it gets overlooked. During shortages, items like broth and canned soups tend to disappear quickly, while coconut milk often remains untouched on shelves simply because it isn't part of most people's usual food rotation. That lack of attention is exactly what makes it a strong candidate for a well-rounded stockpile. Number 7 is nutritional yeast. If you haven't come across it before, that's actually pretty common. And that lack of awareness is exactly what makes it such an interesting item for long-term storage. Nutritional yeast is essentially a deactivated form of yeast that comes in small flakes or powder. It's shelf-stable for years and is known for being rich in nutrients, especially B vitamins, including B12. It also contains a significant amount of protein and provides all 9 essential amino acids, which is relatively rare for a non-animal food source. In a survival situation where the diet becomes repetitive, things like rice and beans day after day, the risk of nutritional gaps becomes very real. Deficiencies in B vitamins, for example, can lead to fatigue, brain fog, nerve issues, and a weakened immune response. Nutritional yeast helps fill in that missing nutritional layer in a very direct way. Beyond its nutritional value, it also has a practical advantage that people often overlook: flavor. It has a savory, slightly cheesy taste that can completely change the experience of otherwise bland meals. A simple bowl of rice or a basic bean dish can suddenly feel more complete and far more palatable with just a small sprinkle mixed in. From a storage and cost perspective, it's also fairly accessible. A typical bag costs around $8 and can last for months, depending on how often it's used, since a small amount goes a long way. And just like some of the other items on this list, it tends to stay on shelves even during shortages. Most shoppers don't really know what it is or why they would use it, so it's often overlooked entirely, which from a preparedness standpoint is exactly what makes it useful. Number 8 is ghee. This is one of those essentials that really belongs in any serious long-term food storage plan. Ghee is basically clarified butter, regular butter that's been slowly heated so the milk solids and moisture are removed. That simple process is what gives it a much longer shelf life compared to standard butter, which can spoil in a matter of weeks even under refrigeration. When stored properly, ghee can remain stable for about 2 to 3 years at room temperature, and in cooler, more consistent conditions, it can last even longer. That makes it especially useful when refrigeration isn't reliable or available. From a practical standpoint, fat is one of the most important components of any long-term diet. Without it, meals feel incomplete and your body struggles to properly absorb fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. Over time, that can affect energy levels, satiety, and overall well-being. Ghee helps address all of that in a very direct way. It also performs well in actual cooking conditions. Because it has a high smoke point, it doesn't break down easily under heat, which makes it suitable for frying, sautéing, and baking. In terms of energy density, a single tablespoon contains roughly 120 calories, providing steady fuel in a very compact form. On top of that, it adds a rich, slightly nutty flavor that can make simple, repetitive meals much more tolerable. What's also worth noting is that ghee isn't a modern invention or trend. It has been used in Indian households for thousands of years, largely because of its stability, versatility, and nutritional value. Its long history is really just practical evidence of how well it works as a staple fat source. A jar typically costs around $10 to $15 depending on quality and brand. And interestingly, even during periods of supply strain, it often remains available on store shelves simply because it isn't part of the average Western shopping routine, so most people overlook it entirely. Number 9 is canned fish roe again, in combination with sardines and mustard sauce. I already covered fish roe earlier, but sardines, especially the ones packed in mustard sauce, deserve their own place on this list because the cost-to-nutrition ratio is genuinely hard to beat. A single can usually runs between $1 and $2, yet it delivers around 20 to 25 grams of complete protein. On top of that, you're also getting omega-3 fatty acids, calcium from the small edible bones, vitamin D, and a decent amount of calories packed into a very small container. What stands out most is how often sardines get overlooked compared to more popular canned proteins. A lot of people tend to stock up on canned chicken or tuna, which are perfectly fine choices, but they also tend to disappear quickly during shortages. In contrast, sardines, especially flavored versions like mustard sauce or olive oil, often remain on shelves much longer simply because fewer people think to buy them. The mustard sauce variety is especially useful because it changes the entire eating experience. Plain sardines can be an acquired taste for some people, but when they're packed in mustard sauce, they become something you can actually eat straight from the can without any preparation. That matters a lot in situations where cooking fuel or time isn't available. In a grid-down scenario, having protein that is ready to eat immediately is a major advantage. There's no need for heating, cooking, or even extra water. Just open the can and it's ready. Personally, I keep around 100 cans in rotation, which cost roughly $150 total. That ends up being 100 full protein servings that can last for years. And because they're so often ignored, they tend to stay available even when other canned goods are disappearing from shelves. Number 10 is TVP, or textured vegetable protein. This is one of those items that most people in preparedness circles either overlook or simply aren't familiar with at all, which is surprising once you look at what it actually offers. TVP is made from defatted soy flour and comes in a completely dried form. When stored correctly, especially in sealed packaging with oxygen absorbers, it can last roughly 10 to 15 years. Its long shelf life is one of its biggest advantages, but the real shock comes from its nutritional density. In its dry state, TVP contains about 50 grams of protein per cup. To put that into perspective, a typical can of chicken breast provides roughly half that amount. So you're getting nearly double the protein in a far more compact form and at a significantly lower cost per serving. Another major advantage is how easy it is to prepare. You simply add hot water, let it sit for around 10 minutes, and it rehydrates into a usable protein base. From there, it can be seasoned and incorporated into a wide range of meals: chili, tacos, soups, stews, or anything else where you want to stretch protein content without changing the overall dish too much. The key feature is that it takes on whatever flavor you add, which makes it extremely flexible in basic cooking situations. From a cost standpoint, it's also hard to ignore. A 1-pound bag typically costs around $3 to $5 and can provide roughly 1,600 calories along with over 100 grams of protein. When you compare that to most traditional canned or freeze-dried protein sources, the efficiency per dollar is difficult to match. Despite that, TVP is still widely ignored during shopping runs because many people don't even recognize what it is. It's usually found in health food sections or ordered online, rather than being part of standard pantry stocking habits. For example, storing around 20 pounds of TVP in properly sealed Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers can translate into over 32,000 calories and roughly 2,000 grams of protein, all for under $100 in many cases. And because it isn't a commonly understood staple, it tends to remain untouched during shortages simply due to lack of awareness. Number 11 is sweat. Now, I know this one might sound a little unfamiliar or even off-putting at first, but it has actually been a long-standing survival staple for centuries, and it's something most modern preparedness conversations completely ignore. Sweat is the firm fat found around the kidneys of cattle and sheep. When it is rendered down, it becomes tallow, which is one of the most calorie-dense and shelf-stable food fats you can store. In its raw form, and especially once rendered, it carries an extremely high energy value, about 3,500 calories per pound. That means a relatively small amount can provide a full day's worth of energy for an adult. Once processed into tallow and stored properly in sealed containers, it can remain stable for years without refrigeration. Its usefulness goes far beyond just eating or cooking. It can be used for frying and baking, but also for making candles, waterproofing leather, producing soap, and serving as a foundational ingredient in traditional survival foods. One of the most interesting historical examples tied to sweat is pemmican. This is a dense, high-energy survival food made from just a few core ingredients: dried meat, dried berries, and rendered sweet. It was widely used by indigenous peoples across North America and later adopted by explorers, traders, and Arctic expeditions because of how long it could last and how effectively it provided sustained energy. Properly prepared pemmican has even been documented as lasting for decades under the right conditions. What's important here is that sweat is not optional in that process. It's essential. Without it, pemmican simply doesn't work. Despite that, it's something very few modern preppers even consider. In many cases, sweat can be purchased directly from butchers for around $2 per pound, and sometimes it's given away for free because most customers don't want it. That creates a strange situation where a highly useful survival ingredient is widely available, inexpensive, and largely ignored. And that lack of attention is exactly what makes it valuable from a preparedness standpoint. Number 12 is MSG, or monosodium glutamate. This one tends to spark debate, but setting the opinions aside, its practical role in food is fairly straightforward. MSG is a pure flavor enhancer that intensifies the natural umami taste in foods. Even a very small amount can noticeably improve the overall flavor of simple dishes. In a long-term survival situation where meals are repetitive, think plain rice, beans, or basic canned foods, taste fatigue becomes a real issue. Food that stops being enjoyable can start to feel harder to eat consistently, which can affect morale and even appetite over time. In that sense, something like MSG isn't about luxury. It's about making basic meals more acceptable to eat day after day. From a food science perspective, MSG works by stimulating umami receptors on the tongue, which enhances savory flavors and increases perceived satisfaction from a meal. When food tastes more satisfying, people often feel full sooner, which can indirectly help stretch limited supplies over a longer period. Regulatory agencies such as the FDA have classified MSG as generally recognized as safe when used in normal dietary amounts. While it has been the subject of public controversy for decades, multiple studies have not confirmed the widespread health concerns often associated with it. It has also been used extensively in global cuisine, particularly in Asian cooking, for well over a century. To give a practical example, I tested this in a simple way during a short stockpile-style experiment. For the first week, I ate plain rice and beans without any seasoning. After a few days, the meals became repetitive and unappealing, and it noticeably affected my overall motivation to eat them. In the second week, I added a small amount of MSG to the same foods. The ingredients didn't change at all, but the flavor did. The meals became more palatable, easier to finish, and overall more satisfying, even with smaller portions. From a cost standpoint, MSG is extremely inexpensive. A 1-pound bag typically costs around $5 and can last for years, since only small amounts are needed per meal. That means it has the potential to enhance thousands of servings of basic food. And in many real-world shortages, MSG tends to remain fully stocked simply because it's widely misunderstood or avoided. That lack of demand is exactly what keeps it available when other seasonings disappear. Number 13 is bouillon cubes and paste. This is one of the simplest and honestly most overlooked items you can include in a survival pantry, despite how cheap, compact, and lightweight it is. Bouillon might not look impressive at first glance, but it plays a much bigger role in long-term food storage than most people realize. When you rely on staples like rice, beans, or dried grains over long periods, food fatigue becomes a real problem. After enough time eating plain, repetitive meals, people often start skipping food. Not because they lack supplies, but because they're tired of the taste. That leads to lower calorie intake, reduced energy, and a noticeable drop in overall performance when staying alert and functional actually matters. Bouillon helps solve that issue in a very practical way. A single cube dissolved in hot water creates a simple broth that can immediately change the flavor profile of otherwise bland food. It can also be used as a base for soups and stews, mixed into rice during cooking, or added to beans to give them more depth and richness. On top of that, its storage life is impressive. Depending on conditions, bouillon cubes and paste can last anywhere from 5 to 10 years, and in some cases even longer. They take up almost no space, weigh very little, and are extremely inexpensive, often around a few dollars for a large box containing dozens of servings. There's also a functional nutritional angle. Bouillon contains sodium, which is an essential electrolyte that supports hydration, muscle function, and nerve activity. In a high-stress environment where you're sweating more and relying on basic foods, maintaining electrolyte balance becomes more important than people often think. From a practical standpoint, even a small stockpile goes a long way. A couple hundred cubes can improve hundreds of meals for a very low cost compared to other survival food options. And because most shoppers don't view bouillon as a survival item, it often remains fully stocked during shortages while more obvious staples disappear quickly. Finally, stepping back from individual items, storage strategy itself becomes just as important as what you store. Even well-chosen food can go bad quickly if it's kept in the wrong environment. Temperature swings, humidity, and light exposure all play a major role in shelf life. Warm areas like garages can cause spoilage or condensation issues over time, while moisture near water sources can lead to mold or degradation in dried goods. Cooler, dark, and stable environments generally preserve food far longer. For bulk storage items like rice, beans, or grains, using sealed food-grade containers with proper barriers helps significantly extend shelf life. Oxygen control and moisture protection are key factors in keeping food stable over long periods. Organization also matters more than most people expect. Keeping supplies labeled, accessible, and rotated properly ensures that food actually gets used rather than forgotten. A simple first-in, first-out system helps prevent waste and keep supplies fresh. Ultimately, the idea isn't about building everything at once, but about gradually creating a system that grows over time with practical, affordable additions. Starting small and staying consistent builds a far more reliable pantry than trying to assemble everything in one step. The overall theme behind all of this is simple. The most useful survival foods aren't always the obvious ones. Often, it's the overlooked, inexpensive, and long-lasting items that end up making the biggest difference when they're actually needed.